How long will Vladimir Putin hold on to power? The Russian leader has named a new prime minister and promised to introduce constitutional reforms. But what's motivating him and what are his plans for the future of Russia? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Richelle Carey. Welcome to the program. Russia's parliament has overwhelmingly approved the nation's new prime minister. The former head of the Federal Tax Service, Mikhail Mishustin, will succeed Dmitry Medvedev. Medvedev resigned along with the entire government on Wednesday after President Vladimir Putin announced major constitutional changes. The reforms could see Putin keep influence over policy even after his final term as president ends in 2024. So, how will Putin retain his grip on power, and what does this political transition mean for Russia? We'll speak to our guests in a moment. First, let's take a closer look at some of those proposed changes. In a State of the Nation speech, Putin said Parliament and the State Council will get more powers, and MPs will get more say in forming the government, including the power to choose the prime minister and cabinet members. A group of 70 people will develop the amendments, and a public confirmation vote is expected by the summer, not a formal referendum that has for now been ruled out. Let's bring in our guests now. In Moscow, we have Viktor Olevich. He's the lead expert at the Center for Actual Politics. In Pine Brook, New Jersey, Amy Knight. She's a historian of the Soviet Union and Russia. And in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Simone Saradzhyan. He's the director of the Russia Matters Project at the Harvard Kennedy School. Welcome to all of you. So this announcement, headlines have described it as a shock, as a surprise. Victor, how do you see it? How would you characterize this announcement from Putin?
Well, this has been actually long in the works in the presidential administration and in other institutions dealing with planning for political transition in Russia. Of course, Putin's current term, his fourth, expires in 2024, and he is seeking to extend the time where he could influence the Russian political sphere beyond his term as president. So essentially, either he will, it is likely that either Putin will move to the State Council, which if these constitutional reform proposals are accepted, the State Council will become a constitutionally mandated state organ with its own powers, and then Putin could possibly move to head the State Council and wield some influence over the Russian political sphere, both domestic and foreign policy, from that vantage point. Or Putin could possibly at some point leave office before 2024, like his predecessor Yeltsin did.
Okay, Victor, if I could stop you for just a moment.
Then move to the State Council at that time.
If I could stop you for just a moment, we're going to outline some of the options in just a moment. First, I just want to get the reaction from the other guests before we start to go down those points. Amy, did you see this as a surprise? Were you shocked by it?
I was, of course, surprised, as most people in the Russian media and most observers were. But I do think that these planned changes in the Constitution that Putin has proposed have been long in the making, and this is part of his longer-term strategy to ensure that he can basically continue to run Russia after his presidential term expires in 2024. And I may be in the minority on this, but I don't think that this necessarily means that Dmitry Medvedev, who was resigned as prime minister as a result of these changes, I don't think that this means that Medvedev is completely out of the picture. I would imagine that he also knew about these forthcoming changes, and this new position that's been created for Medvedev in the National Security Council to be directly under President Putin could prove to be quite an important post. And this might be, a place for him to be reserved so that he might be considered for the presidency again. So, but also I think Putin has left it open that he can actually continue to be president after 2024.
It's an interesting point you brought up about Medvedev, and we're going to revisit that in just a moment. First, Simone, I'm curious, what was your reaction to this announcement, these proposed changes?
To me, the timing was surprising. I thought that would happen somewhere closer to 2024, so that Medvedev would be, as chronically unpopular prime minister, would be sacrificed closer to that, so to say, to that date when Putin's term expires. And from what I read, quite a few ministers, and the government was supposed to meet for the first time in New Year this past Thursday, were surprised and were unaware of the coming changes. But I think Dmitry Medvedev knew, I agree with Amy on that, if only because the bill that Putin introduced to create this position, deputy chairman of the Security Council, was submitted to the State Duma the day after Putin announced the changes. So that means it had been in the works for some time, and probably Medvedev was consulted, asked whether he would accept that post before the bill was drafted.
So you say that the timing, what of the timing? What do you make of the timing, Simone?
Well, I think that kind of a early start of the reconfiguration of power means that Vladimir Putin has already made up his mind, in contrast to the previous change of guard, when he had Medvedev and Sergei Ivanov compete until fairly late into the game, and he made his mind that he was going to choose Medvedev fairly late, and then Medvedev went on and became elected the president of Russia. This time, Putin must have decided on configuration of power early on, but the question of successor is at the post of the president, if he decides, and it's likely that he will do so, not to remain the president after his fourth term expires. I think that question is still open, and I agree with Amy that Dmitry Medvedev is not completely out of picture, but I think his chances of becoming the president with less powers have been significantly diminished. I think the new candidate for that successor post would be someone from a younger generation of leaders that Vladimir Putin is now grooming.
Viktor, let me get your thoughts on Dmitry Medvedev, since our other guests have brought this up. What do you think the future might be for him? And they both said he's been pretty unpopular.
Well, it does look like the position he has been appointed to right now, the position of the deputy head of the Security Council, is a more or less temporary one for him. It's not his final career destination. Of course, for a long time it has been rumored that the position he seeks in the Russian political sphere after his career as prime minister expires is as head of Russia's constitutional court. He is, of course, a lawyer by training. He was educated as a lawyer in the same university that Vladimir Putin graduated from in St. Petersburg. And the fact that he has not been appointed to head the Constitutional Court, but instead has been given this position, a newly created position, specifically for him, as the deputy head of the Security Council, is testament to Putin probably not yet sure as to where Medvedev will end up later. It is also significant that the Security Council of the Russian Federation is mostly a military and security structure. And it is headed, the secretary of the Security Council is General Nikolai Patrushev, the former head of the Federal Security Service. And most of the staff of the Security Council also comes from, as I said, from security services and the military. Medvedev, unlike others in the Security Council, is a civilian politician. And his move there may signify that Putin may want to have a close ally, one of his closest allies, on the Security Council to watch over and retain significant control over that structure in that way also. The new prime minister who has been appointed instead of, in place of Dmitry Medvedev, Mikhail Mishustin, who comes from the Federal Tax Service, is also most likely not going to stay in that position for longer than 1 or 2 years. He seems to be a placeholder in a way before the real successor, potential successor to Putin, is appointed closer to change of closer to election time.
Okay, so Amy, I want to ask you about that, about Mikhail Mishustin. Just a few days ago, he was largely unknown, and now he is the prime minister of Russia. His background is in taxes. I mean, there are some thoughts that maybe he actually might be the person that can help Vladimir Putin implement these national projects and things of the sort. But Victor's saying perhaps he's just a temporary placeholder. What does the choice of Mikhail Mishustin say to you about what Putin's vision is?
Well, first of all, I think that Putin has already signified a diminution of powers of the Council of Ministers. If these reforms he suggested go forward, then it means that the Parliament will actually have the power of appointment of the Prime Minister and the cabinet. So, I think my personal view is that Putin is shifting power to another body, probably more power to the National Security Council. Now, it's interesting that Mishustin was head of the tax police. Of course, the tax police, or the tax service, I should say, is a very important body because it's through a lot of tax fraud cases that the Kremlin can, or oligarchs and people who are involved in high finance, can go after their enemies. So this is a very powerful political weapon for any agency. And I would say that probably Mishustin has shown his loyalty to Putin. I agree that in the long term, I don't think he's going to be put forward as any kind of a candidate to lead the country. But I don't think we should underestimate the fact that he did head the tax service for a number of years, and that this is a very important body just in terms of the whole way that the legal system operates when it comes to finance and economics.
Simone, I'm interested in your thoughts as well, Simone, on
I think he's a capable manager who has proved to be very successful in taking his ministry, his tax service, to the digital age. The tax service leads all other government agencies in digitalizing its services. And if you were to ask a Russian taxpayer, he would say that the quality of service, both for individual and corporate taxpayers, have improved. Collection of taxes have also been improved, which could not help pleasing Vladimir Putin. And I think part of the rationale for his appointment, though I don't see him as a leader of Russia, a potential successor, what part of the rationale is to expand that island of excellence, so to say, in the tax service to the rest of the government, because frankly speaking, there's a reason why the government has been unpopular and with the public, and it's not only declining incomes, real incomes that have been declining for 5 out of the past 6 years, but also the quality of managing national projects that are supposed to avail the general public. We know that Dmitry Medvedev's government has been dragging its feet on the issue and unable to accomplish what Putin sees as, frankly, as priority in his remainder of his term. So I would expect him to focus on that, on improving the quality of government, on making governance more modern, so to say, and more convenient for both authorities to govern, but also for citizens to use government services.
So these changes that Putin is proposing, Simone, how does it help Vladimir Putin accomplish what he says his priorities are, these national projects? Because from the outside looking in, it looks like his priority is foreign policy.
Sorry, the changes, the amendments to the Constitution that he's proposing have little to do, frankly, with changes in quality of government. Albeit, you could argue that by empowering the parliament, he sort of fosters greater competition, theoretically, between the branches of power, enhancing checks and balances. But in the Russian case, where one party, which is, by the way, still led by Dmitry Medvedev, dominates the parliament, and it essentially rubber stamps what the government, not the government, but the president and the presidential administration tell them to pass as laws. So yes, if the parliament were more competitive, if the elections in Russia were more competitive, parliamentary, the changes he's proposing would have eventually impacted the quality of governance in the constitution. But as the things are, they are mostly designed to help him continue steer Russia, after 2024. It is the change of the prime minister that I see as a sign of his willingness to sort of give a strong impetus to the national projects that he's been pursuing, because Mishustin is an effective manager and he is focused on innovation. When he was asked what he would do if he would go back to the private sector again, and he was in private sector at UFG, he said, I would focus on innovation because that's what drives him, that's what interests him, and that's what his record in the tax service shows he's capable of.
Viktor, you started this discussion a little while ago about what some of Vladimir Putin's options may be to remain really in the driver's seat for Russia past 2024. What do you think is the most likely option?
Well, first of all, I want to clarify something Amy had said. She said that more power seems to be moving to the Security Council. Actually, the constitutional amendments that Putin had proposed are giving more power to the State Council. These are two different institutions, and the State Council previously had not been in the Constitution, mentioned in the Constitution as a state. Constitutionally mandated state organ, and now Putin is proposing making the State Council a part of the Russian Constitution and giving it more power. So it is very likely that Putin and the presidential administration is looking at the option of having Putin either after his presidential term expires in 2024, or if he chooses to leave the presidency earlier, then he would be able to move to head the State Council, which by that time will be a much more influential body within the Russian constitutional political structure, Russian political order. And then from that position, Putin will be able to wield the influence both over the formation of the Russian government and over Russia's domestic and foreign policy. Of course, it is also important to note what other constitutional amendments Putin had proposed in his address. First of all, he proposed that the Russian constitution have predominance over international law or any international treaties or laws that Russia has been under which jurisdiction Russia has been under until now. And that would make the Russian case closer to the American political order, where the Americans don't really recognize either the rulings of the International Criminal Court or the UN Tribunal or other international legal bodies. So this could impact Russia's relationship with the European Court on Human Rights and other international bodies that have more or less ruled against Russia. Also, another important proposal is to allow the Russian president to recall judges from the Russian Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court. And of course, that would divest the Russian legal structures, the Constitutional and Supreme Court, of some of their power, because the judges there would feel that they could be recalled by the president if they are not, if they're not to the liking, if their decisions are not to the liking of the executive branch.
Right,
so
Viktor,
those proposals are also something that has to be taken in context.
Okay, Amy, I want to you're the historian among us. I want to put something to you that a Russia expert wrote. I picked this up yesterday. He says, it makes perfect sense that Putin, a man raised in the communist system, would see it as natural to govern from the head of a party and reduce the Russian presidency to a ceremonial post. Put another way, that's how the old USSR was set up. Does that sound like an accurate description of how Putin sees the world and sees Russia?
No, it doesn't. I think that if you were going to make any comparisons with the Soviet period, it would probably be, and again, I disagree on this question of the State Council versus the Security Council, the National Security Council. I think that the National Security Council, because it includes the Minister of Defense, all of the Siloviki, the law enforcement people, the security people, foreign policy, that this is Putin's main concern. And this is where the power, I think, will be focused. And I would say that maybe the Security Council is more like the old Soviet Politburo. But I'd just like to add something about the whole 2024 question. You know, when Putin was announcing these changes, he talked about the article in the constitutional provision that limits the presidency, a candidate for becoming president for more than two, or serving as president for more than 2 consecutive terms. But he also said, kind of interestingly, that he didn't think this issue was fundamental. I think that it's entirely possible that when they make these changes in the Constitution and they have a referendum on these changes, it is possible that some legal experts would say that the old Constitution, therefore, is no longer in force, and this idea of 2 consecutive terms is not retroactive. So, to state it in simple terms, this could give a legal way for Putin to start serving an additional, to run again for president in 2024.
Okay, Simone, I'm going to put the last question to you. This type of discussion that we're having, at the root of it all is a way for Putin to figure out how to stay in power. Does that sound like a democracy?
Well, democracy can be liberal, can be sovereign, as Vladislav Surkov once called it. I'd say it's closer to what Vladislav Surkov has described as sovereign democracy, which in my view is not a real democracy, but you have some kind of pretense of division of powers. Unfortunately, one branch of power dominates the others. And in terms of the question of Putin's options into 24, I was going to add, if I may, that I essentially see five options. One is just to stay in the Kremlin. With his control of parliament, he can extend number of terms he serves. Then leave completely without taking any pause. Second option. Another option that was floated in the previous time he decided to leave Kremlin was to become Secretary of the Security Council. Yet another fourth option is the Prime Minister, and the fifth one is the State Council. And if I had to bet, I would bet on the fifth option, because it is for a reason that he had announced he was going to amend the Constitution to empower State Council, which is not mentioned in the present Constitution, to make it into executive power, part of the executive branch of power. And I think that's where he's headed. He's going to be the sort of the father figure who can exercise control over the successor, but also see how that successor does, and if he eventually can diminish perhaps his day-to-day involvement and delegate more powers to that successor.
Well, this all remains to be seen. Thank you all for your expertise on this topic. We appreciate it very much. Thank you for joining us, Viktor Olevich, Amy Knight, and Simone Saradzhyan. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime. Go to our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Richelle, Carey, and the entire team, bye for now.